Good morning and welcome to Birmingham Unitarian Church. I'm the Reverend Mandy Beal. I'm this congregation's senior minister. I'm joined in worship leadership this morning by our co-directors of music ministry, Abha and Stephen Deering, and worship associate Ed Sharples. We are very grateful for the support of our communications coordinator, Sarah Constantakis, as well as the work of our Zoom greeter today, Drika DeGraff. BUC is a spiritual home for all people of goodwill. We are a congregation of many beliefs, many backgrounds and identities. Our social justice, this work is focused on 4 areas that includes racial justice, environmental justice, economic inequality, and civic engagement. We are a green sanctuary congregation, which is a designation about our commitment to the planet. And we are a welcoming congregation, which is about our commitment to LGBTQ inclusion. More information about those designations can be found on our website. Our worship services are hosted on Zoom every Sunday morning at 10:30 and then later posted on Facebook. After the service, we invite you to stay for a virtual coffee hour, especially if you're worshiping with us for the first time this morning. It's a great way to get to know us. We have 3 announcements today. First, please join the Humanists of BUC this evening at 7 p.m. when their featured speaker will be our very own Marilyn Kelly. Marilyn Kelly is a BUC member and she's also the former Chief Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court. She will be speaking on the future of the US Supreme Court. Zoom access information for the meeting is on BUC's meeting calendar on our website. Our next announcement is about Getting to Know UU. The next session of Getting to Know UU has been moved to next Sunday, which is November 15th. Everyone is welcome to attend the class, which will include a short history of BUC and a virtual tour of our campus, which has had some exciting updates. So I invite you to join that class. And last, we are very happy to report that thanks to the generosity of congregants at BUC, the Muslim Unity Center, Northwest UU, Beacon UU, and UU Farmington, we've raised over $15,000 for South Oakland Shelter. That is more than double of our original goal. Those funds will be used to pay for meals for the 100 people who are currently housed in local motel rooms. Thank you so much for your support. And thank you again for joining us this morning or whenever you're watching this. Although we are not together physically, we are together in spirit, and it is good to be together again. And with that, our service will begin. We worship in our separate homes this morning, but we are joined by a multitude of Unitarian Universalists the world over in lighting our chalice. We light this chalice to mark the possibilities of forgiveness, hope, and healing in our nation and in our personal relationships. May we find a way forward, guided by the beacons of truth and justice.
The first hymn this morning is number 52, In Sweet Fields of Autumn. In sweet fields of autumn, the gold rain is falling, the white clouds drift lonely, the wild swan is calling. Alas for the daisies, the tall fern and grasses, when winds sweep and rainfall fill lowlands and passes. The snows of December shall fill windy hollow, the bleak rain trails after, the March wind shall follow. The deer through the valleys leave print of their going, and diamonds of sleet mark the ridges of snowing. The stillness of death shall stoop over the water, the plover sweep low where the pale streamlets falter. But deep in the earth clod the black seed is living, when spring sounds her bugles for rousing and giving.
Well, good morning. Good morning on a day in November that feels like a day in May. It's a day for thankfulness in a month in which Americans celebrate their gratitude for existence, for family, for country, and for all things that sustain us. It is a day to be thankful for our church in these days of a pandemic, for those with whom we chat on Zoom. Let it be a day also to recognize how different our lives would be without modern technology. This day in November, a day that feels like a day in May, is a day for which we are very thankful. It's good to be in worship with each other and to say aloud, thanks for our church home. Thanks for our church community. May it be.
We come now to the time in the service that we ask for contributions for our congregation. The placement of requesting the offering is very intentional. This is the part of the service that is set aside for spiritual practices. When we invite generosity, what we're looking for here is an expression of our interconnectedness. Your contributions go to fund the service of our church, which means so much to everyone else. This is a way of supporting each other's needs more than it is so a way for us to pay for our Zoom account, although it does do that. It is in that spirit I invite you to give generously. Contributions can be sent through our website or through Venmo with username @BUCMI, and we also are happy to receive checks in the mail. And with that, I invite you to give to the good works of our congregation.
The offertory song this morning is one that you've heard before, and you might be hearing echoes of it more and more in recent days and days to come. This is Turn, 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 originally recorded by the Byrds. Season, turn, 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 and a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap, a time to kill, a time To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to build up, a time to break down, a time to dance, a time to mourn, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones together. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time to every purpose under heaven. A time of love, a time of hate, a time of war, a time of peace, a time you may embrace, a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain, a time to lose, a time to rend, a time to sow, a time for love, a time for hate, a time for peace. I swear it's not too late.
We turn our attentions now to the prayers of the people, the joys and sorrows of our congregation. The seasons of our life do indeed come and go. And throughout all of those seasons, we are here together, united as one worshiping community, one body, covenanted together to share the joys, the sorrows, the wins and the losses, to share it all. And as those seasons come and go, may we remain mindful of them. May we be present to the changes in our lives, open and accepting whatever it is that comes our way, knowing that we are grounded in love and held in each other's love and grace. May that be so. Amen, and blessed be.
There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere. Hope. There is more hope somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more hope somewhere. Joy. There is more joy somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more joy somewhere.
We've heard a beautiful rendition from Ecclesiastes, and here are the unadorned words themselves. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek, a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to throw away, a time to tear, and a time to sow, a time to keep silence, and a time to speak, a time to love, and a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. Aelith, who is the assumed but once anonymous author of Ecclesiastes, reminds us not to become too settled in what we have or where we have it. Life is filled with paradoxes, and there is always the possibility that wherever or however we are, the opposite of the current conditions may await us. Now, I can give you an example from my own life. Diane, my wife, died from Alzheimer's complications. When she entered a nursing facility, I knew she would never return home. And then, after Diane had lived in the nursing home 13 months, a nurse called me one morning and said, "Mr. Sharples, will you come to the nursing home? Your wife has taken a turn for the worse." When I arrived at Evergreen, the nurse said, "You know what's happened, don't you?" We walked down the hall together. We walked to Diane's room. She was looking more peaceful than she had in her last several years. But I sat beside the bed, took her hands in mine, and yes, I cried. I wish I could have done more. I wish I could have done more. It was the darkest day in my life. 2 weeks later, in a ceremony led by the Reverend Doug Gallagher, my sons and I scattered Diane's ashes on the plants in the memorial glen, and then followed the memorial service. Now, I admit to being disconsolate, depressed. Soon after the reception, I went through troubling days of being alone in a house of memory as I had never been before. And finally, I realized I had to decide on a future, one of isolation or one of re-engagement with life. I had spent my professional life helping students become more logical when they left the classroom than when they first entered, more independent than when we first met. I still had my sons, I still had my grandchildren, I still had a church home here at BUC, and I still had a community of friends. And there was just a possibility that I could continue to help others in various ways. That became my decision, one that brought me out of the darkness, out of the darkest period of my life. By becoming re-engaged in the service of life, I found a way forward. Gehaleth was saying in a slightly different way, there is a time for grief and a time to be healed, a time to be in the darkest night of the soul, and there is a time to re-engage. From darkness comes light and even laughter. This is a day in November that feels like a day in May. May it be.
Thank you, Ed, for that very touching personal reflection. Y'all, this year, bless its heart, has been wild. There is a time for everything in life, and I think it all happened this year. And I don't know about you, but I am ready for this year to be over. Now, I was planning to use the book of Ecclesiastes this morning all along, and that's how Steve Abha and I planned for that offertory music. There is a season for everything, every matter under heaven. And that passage was a natural fit for what I assumed would be the end of the Trump presidency. And then the election cycle went the way that it did. So about a month ago, I lost faith and I decided to switch to a darker, very bleak section of Ecclesiastes that comes before this assertion that everything changes. That passage literally begins, meaningless, everything is meaningless. Ed wrote a lovely reflection about the absurdity of life found in Herman Melville's Moby Dick. And I was ready to talk all about Jean-Paul Sartre and how hell is other people. But then things changed. So I moved my thinking back to my original choice, this iconic passage about how everything has its time and that time will always end. And poor Ed was good enough to accommodate me yesterday afternoon. And the one that read at a moment ago, you guys, I've been up for a while. I swear to you, I've written 5,000 words the past 2 days because everything has changed so fast. I apologize. I'll pull it together. So Ed read a passage, Ecclesiastes 3, and that's what I decided we should use after all. And then last night, Joe Biden quoted that in his acceptance speech. I don't know if you caught it. So it was a sign. It was always meant to be. So in summary, today's sermon has nothing to do with the Battlestar Galactica. I apologize if you were looking forward to that. Ed and I have put our work about the meaninglessness of life into a drawer, and we are confident that there will be another time where we will need to use that subject. But that time is not today. Today marks the beginning of a new season in the United States. To everything, there is a season, and this is the season of joy. This is the season for healing, for building, for hope. Talking about politics in church is always tricky. There are many considerations to be made, and perhaps the most important one is what it can do to our relationships. I know that there are members of our church community who are Republicans. Diversity of political thought is part of what makes Unitarian Universalism what it is. That's what we aspire to, is diversity of thought. Our fourth principle affirms our commitment to a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. UU congregations need to have a diversity of beliefs and opinions because free thinking is at the heart of our liberal religious tradition. And one of the foundations of a UU church is to provide a marketplace of ideas where our own beliefs and values are shaped by those of others. But there are boundaries to those ideas. It is the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. The boundaries are wide and they are permeable, but they are boundaries nonetheless. Unitarian Universalism has an identity. We do not have a shared set of beliefs, but we do have a shared set of values. And those values are guided by our 7 principles, and they are evident in our actions. And among these are the sanctity of the individual, the right to conscience, and the importance of the democratic process. And those values play well on both sides of the aisle. It is absolutely possible to be a Republican and a UU. In fact, I am told that many of our congregations were majority Republican until they weren't anymore. And there's some argument about that, whether it was during the Reagan administration or Nixon's Southern strategy. All of that could be UU folklore, but there is a far cry between the traditional platform of the Republican Party and what we have seen from the Trump administration. And I, for one, welcome the involvement of traditional Republicans in our congregation. And perhaps even some of you were Republicans, and you might be considering a return to a party that now has the chance to return to sanity, to the values that made it great when it once was. Many of the values of traditional Republican Party are compatible with Unitarian Universalism, but the values of Trumpism are not. And it is true that I cannot endorse a specific candidate. That is true legally, but the election is now over, and so I don't have to. I would actually never tell you who to vote for. What I have done is told you to vote your values. And I know that when I have said vote your values, that has sounded partisan. And that is not because I have made a partisan statement, it's because only one party has acted anywhere near in accordance with our values for years. In the past, the phrase vote your values might have left you with some food for thought to consider the nuances and the possible outcomes of different platforms. But in this election, there was only one candidate who came remotely close to aligning with our values. And that says more about the leadership of the Republican Party, or the lack thereof, that does about me, right? It doesn't say as much about me or as much about modern Unitarian Universalism as it does about what's been happening in our country. There have been a few disaffected people in our congregation and in our larger association who have expressed irritation at the implication that all UUs are Democrats. It's true that not all UUs are Democrats. And yet I am still waiting for anybody to talk with me about how the values and the actions of the Trump administration are compatible with Unitarian Universalism. When I have tried to have that conversation, I have received 2 responses. The first is Barack Obama deported people too. I know that. We all know that. I spoke out against the mass deportation during the Obama presidency too. That kind of deflection indicates an unwillingness to address the actions of the Trump administration. And it's an attempt to get a rise out of me. It's very transparent. The second response to my invitation to talk about the compatibility or incompatibility with Trumpism and Unitarian Universalism is some line about how discussing politics is inappropriate for churches or for ministers. That is also deflection. And it further indicates that there is no compatibility to be had. There is no cogent argument about how the values of Trumpism and Unitarian Universalism overlap. If you think you have that argument, I would still love to have that conversation. But to say that politics should not come up at church is nonsense. It is more than appropriate for churches and ministers to deal with politics. In fact, I believe that it is imperative for us to do so. When churches operate outside of the context of reality, they stop being churches and they become a thought experiment. Politics and religion are inherently linked because politics are values writ large. We always vote our values, whether or not a minister admonishes us to do so. My preaching and ethical analysis has never been an attack on the Republican Party. It has been an indictment of the specific actions and policies of the Trump administration. And you can be sure that I will continue that same line of ethical analysis in the years to come. In fact, I already disagree with Joseph Biden on a few very important topics. My purview as a UU minister is not to condemn another person's beliefs, but their actions. So when Joe Biden's actions don't align with UU values and commitments, you better believe that you will hear about it from me. But there's no need to get ahead of myself on that today. Today is a turning point. It is a new season in the history of our nation. The time has come for healing and forgiveness, starting with the plucking up of what has been planted, which can only happen in the context of truth. The bitter fruit that came to full bloom during the past 4 years was planted at the founding of our nation, and it has been germinating just below the surface, fed by selfishness and complacency. This was not some strange season that came upon us from sources unknown. What happened was a group of people learned how to tap into the systems of power and oppression that have always existed in our country, and they learned how to weaponize them in a new way. Donald Trump is not the cause of our nation's disparities and violence and divisiveness. He was a symptom. So let us not be fooled into believing that we will go back to being something that we never were. It will take work to root out the divisions of our nation and to sow the seeds of new possibility, but it can be done. The example of so many Black women working in Georgia is proof of that. And I specifically want to name Stacey Abrams, Tamika Atkins, Helen Butler, Rebecca DeHart, Deborah Scott, and I acknowledge that there are so many others. It's time to get to work plucking up those seeds and planting something new. It is a time to heal, a time to love, to build, to make peace. It is a time for us to restore our faith in each other, a time for us to embrace, but not literally because COVID is still happening. This is an exciting time. We have the opportunity to plant a new garden, one that meets all of our needs. We may not know exactly what that garden will be like, and we may have different ideas of how to get there, but it's time to get to work on it, to roll up our sleeves and get in the action. This is the beginning of a new season of hope and reason and possibility. We can get there. We can do it. May it be so. Amen, and blessed be.
So let's go ahead and sing about this together. This is number 1018. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. There will be freedom in
now go out into this world with celebration, with singing, with joy, and take with you the knowledge that we are not done yet, but we get there through joy. Amen.